The first criteria is fluency and coherence. This is worth 25% of your band score. Fluency and coherence refers to how well you are able to discuss topics without pausing or hesitating too much or repeating the same words. To get a high score for fluency and coherence, you also have to develop your answers and organize your ideas and opinions in a logical way. Now, what do I mean by organize your ideas? Well, take a look at this example.
We are healthier in some ways. We are less healthy in other ways.
Now, watch this version.
Well, I believe that generally we are more health conscious, but I think in some ways we are less healthy than in the past.
Did you notice in the second example how the candidate organized her ideas with words and phrases like, well, I believe, generally, but I think? I will talk about connecting your ideas in more detail later in this course. So let's look at the second criteria, lexical resource. This is worth 25% of your band score. Lexical resource refers to the range of vocabulary that you can use in your speaking. This includes the right collocations, words that are naturally used together, like make a phone call. To get a high score for lexical resource, you should be able to use less common vocabulary. Now, what do I mean by less common vocabulary? Well, watch this example.
Well, it snows, and sometimes it's very, very cold.
Now compare this version.
Well, it usually snows a lot, and on some days it can be bitterly cold.
Did you notice the collocation bitterly cold in the second example? Bitterly cold is a less common way of saying very, very cold. Now, you don't need to use this kind of vocabulary in every single sentence, but if you want to get band 7 or higher, you have to use some less common words or phrases. I will talk about vocabulary and synonyms later in this course. So let's look at the third criteria, grammatical range and accuracy. This refers to the number of different grammatical structures that you can use in your speaking, and how frequently you make mistakes. So to get a high band, you have to be prepared to talk about past, present, and future using appropriate tenses. You might need to talk about hypothetical situations using would plus infinitive. For example, I would really like to visit China. I've never been there. You might need to speculate about something using appropriate modal verbs. For example, my country's transport system might improve in the future. Now, to get band 7, you should be able to use a range of different structures, and it's okay to make some mistakes, as long as they are not serious mistakes. If your mistakes do not block communication, then they are not serious. Of course, to get a higher band, you are expected to make fewer mistakes. So the final criteria is pronunciation. This is also 25% of your speaking score. So to get a high band, you need good pronunciation. But good pronunciation doesn't mean that you have to change your accent. Good pronunciation means you can pronounce individual sounds correctly, stress the right syllables in a word, and have good intonation. Watch this example.
In small towns and villages, a woman usually gets married at an early age.
Now compare this version.
In small towns and villages, women usually get married at an early age.
In the first example, the candidate pronounces women, usually and early, incorrectly. English learners typically mispronounce these words because, like many English words, they aren't spelled the way they sound. We will look at pronunciation later in this course. However, it can take some time to improve your pronunciation. So if your test is very soon, I recommend you concentrate on other areas of your speaking. So that's the IELTS speaking test marking system. Everything I teach you in this course is designed to increase your score for each of these 4 areas and help you improve your speaking so that you can get your target band or even higher. Listen to the examiner's questions carefully. This is very important. If you don't do this, you might misunderstand the question. And even if your English is good, you will not get a positive score for your answer. Give relevant answers. You must answer the question that the examiner asked. For example, if the examiner asks where you are from, you have to talk about your hometown, not necessarily where you are living now. This is connected with listening to the question, as I mentioned before. Ask for clarification if you don't understand the question. The examiner is allowed to repeat the instructions twice, so ask for clarification if you need it. You will not be penalized for that. Later in this course, I will show you how to ask the examiner to repeat in a natural way. Express your opinions and give examples to support your ideas. During the speaking test, you will be asked for your opinions on different topics. Giving your personal opinions and supporting them with examples from your experience will make your answers more interesting. Use conversation fillers to give yourself time to think. If you don't know what to say, or if you need time to think, you can say something like, that's an interesting question, or let me think about that. This way, you don't lose points for fluency. I will give you more examples in a later video. Relax and try to enjoy yourself. Yes, I know it's an exam, and it's probably a life-changing exam for you, but it is easier to speak more fluently when you are relaxed, and your pronunciation and intonation will also improve. Try to use interesting adjectives. As I mentioned in the previous video, it helps to use some less common words if you want to get band 7 to 9. For example, instead of repeating the word difficult all the time, you could try using other words like tricky or challenging. I will talk about synonyms in a later video. Paraphrase if you don't know a word. If you forget a word, it's not a big problem, so don't panic. You can use other words to explain what you want to say. In fact, if you do this well, you will get credit for it. I will talk more about that in a later video. Finally, speak clearly. As I mentioned in the previous video, 25% of your score is based on pronunciation, and good pronunciation also means that the examiner can understand you easily. So, open your mouth and raise your voice if you tend to speak too quietly. You should at the same time avoid giving technical details about your work. The examiner doesn't share your technical knowledge, so if you work in a technical field, for example engineering or IT, be prepared to talk about your work in a way that is clear for everybody and avoid giving technical details. So here are some things you should try not to do in the test if you want a high band. Don't give very short answers. In part 1 of the test, the examiner may ask you some simple questions like, where are you from? But you should answer with more than 1 or 2 words. Here's a good example. Where are you from?
I'm from a city called Krakow, which is in the southwest of Poland. I've lived there all my life.
Don't repeat yourself all the time and overuse simple words. To get a high band, you need to show that you can use different words to say the same thing. So try not to repeat the same words all the time. Don't memorize long answers. The examiner is trained to notice pre-prepared answers and will not give you a positive score. What's more, your intonation will probably sound unnatural, so you will get a lower score for pronunciation. Just don't do this. Don't get stressed if you don't understand the question. As I explained earlier, you are allowed to ask the examiner to repeat the question, so don't panic. Don't make long, frequent pauses. As I explained earlier, it's better to use conversation fillers than to say nothing. If you sit in silence, you will lose points for fluency and coherence. Don't spell your name for the examiner. When the examiner asks for your name at the beginning of the test, just give your full name without spelling it. If there's an English version of your name that you like to use, you can add something like, "But you can call me Michael." Don't use your native language. Use only English during the test. Don't use words and idioms that you are not sure about. If you have just learnt a new word, phrase, structure, or idiom, and you are not confident about using it, then don't use it. It's too risky. You can easily use it the wrong way. You should be especially careful with idioms and phrasal vocabulary. Don't write on the task card in Part 2. The examiner will give you a piece of paper for making notes. Don't ask the examiner if what you say is correct. The examiner is not allowed to respond to you unless you need clarification about a question. Yourself answering questions. Ask yourself some typical speaking test questions and record your answers on your mobile device or computer. Then listen to your answers. Did you use a range of grammatical structures? Did you use any less common vocabulary? Did you mispronounce many words? Did you hesitate a lot? You might not notice all your mistakes, but you will notice a few of them. Write down your answers. While you listen to your recorded answers, you can write them down word for word. This way, you will notice more of your mistakes, and if you have followed the advice in this course. Practice describing your own photographs. This will train you to talk about your memories in case you get a question about an event or experience in your past, which is quite common in the speaking test. Try to talk about what the event was, when it took place, and say how you felt. Read a text and then speak it. Firstly, read a text or article. Try to summarize what you read in your own words. Record yourself and write down your summary. This will train you to paraphrase and use synonyms effectively, which is important if you want to achieve a high band. Recall your memories. In the speaking test, the examiner may ask personal questions about your life. Think about the people you know, the places you have visited, the events you have attended, and the objects that you own. Then practice talking about them. Think aloud. Instead of thinking in your own language, try thinking aloud in English. For instance, instead of planning your day in your native language, say the same thing in English. For example, "Okay, today I've got an important meeting. I should get going. I'm going to be late." This will make you feel more comfortable speaking English. Watch films. Watching films is a good way to improve your spoken English. The more you listen to native speakers, the more confident you will become in speaking. Try to understand what the actors are saying. Pay attention to the structures or look up words in a dictionary. Try to follow the subtitles in English or in your own language. Find a speaking partner. If you don't have a teacher to help you prepare for the test, or if you need additional practice, find a speaking partner. If possible, try to find a partner who is slightly above your level. However, this might not be so easy since your partner will also need your help. Listen to English speakers. Listening is very important. The more you listen to native speakers, the more confident you will feel in speaking. Sources of listening include real people, tourists, travelers, and so on, audiobooks, and podcasts. Think in English. If I had to recommend just one preparation tip, I would suggest this. Between now and the day of your test, try to think in English as much as possible. This requires a lot of discipline, but thinking in English has a lot of benefits. It can make you hesitate less when you speak because you are not translating from your own language all the time. This will improve your confidence and you will sound more natural. In fact, this is one of the secrets of successful language learners. And don't worry too much about making mistakes. Thinking in English might not improve your grammar or vocabulary, but it will improve your fluency and coherence. And remember, fluency and coherence is 25% of your speaking test score. Think positive. Stress is caused by the way you think. If you imagine a negative experience during your exam, for example, not being able to understand the questions, you will start to panic a little. It is important to realize that you have no idea how the exam will go until you take it. It could be much easier than you expect. Before you go into the exam, try to remember a test that you took in the past which was much easier than you had expected. Sleep and exercise. Try to get a good night's sleep before the exam and start the day with a healthy breakfast. Doing some exercise is also a good idea. Go for a run, walk or swim. This will take your mind off the exam and help you to relax. Think about the examiner. Try to be aware of the examiner's perspective. A professional examiner has been in this situation hundreds of times and does not want you to fail. You are certainly not the first nervous candidate. If you step back and think about the big picture, you will relax more. Focus on the questions. During the exam, if you focus on the questions, you won't have time to get stressed. If you don't understand or didn't hear something, ask the examiner to explain or repeat it, as I discussed in an earlier video. Imagine a conversation. Try to think of the exam as a conversation with an acquaintance of yours, especially for parts 1 and 3. If you go into the exam thinking that you're going to take a test, you will put more pressure on yourself.